Welcome back. We are going to talk about dreaming in this segment. Why do we dream? The short answer is we don't know. However, as is the case with a lot of things in psychology, we have three theories. So uh, I know I will disclose that I have my favorite theory of why we dream. I tend to adhere to the information processing theory. Um, you're free to like whichever theory you want or generate your own. But right now in psychology, we have three main theories for why we dream. Now, some things I'd like to tell you about dreaming. I mentioned before that REM sleep is when we are the most likely to dream. If you wake a person who's got the eyes rolling back and forth and the relaxed body but the raised heart rate and stuff, if you wake a person up during that stage, about 90-95% of the time they'll report that they were dreaming. So we think that most people experience dreams when they're showing symptoms of REM stage. So this is kind of an interesting question. We see that fetuses in the womb have eyes that dart back and forth as if they're experiencing REM. Are they dreaming? We see it in our dogs and cats, like I mentioned before. Are they dreaming? What are they dreaming about? What's going on? Let's interpret their dreams through these three theories that we're going to talk about, right? So things to keep in mind. This is not just a human thing. It's not just because other species experience REM. We've discovered that birds experience REM sleep. So it's not just our species, and it's not only those who are out in the world. They do it in the womb. So why? Why are we experiencing? And is every REM stage necessarily indicating that the person is experiencing that the REMer is experiencing a dream? I mean, maybe the parakeet is just rolling its eyes back and forth. We don't know. So things to keep in the back of your mind while you're thinking about this question of why do we dream? Well, we have to start by discussing Freud's theory because Freud was the first person to actually try and explain what dreams are, what they mean, and stuff like that. And also, I think a lot of students kind of like the Freudian idea of what dreaming is about because I get a lot of questions that imply people think that he's onto something. One of the things he said is that dreams give us an opportunity for wish fulfillment, that things that are in our unconscious get an opportunity to be expressed through dreams and to feel satisfied through dreams. So that's an interesting perspective that we're not going to hear in the other two theories, the idea that you have unconscious things that are being fulfilled by the dreams. He also talks about the idea that the dream that you're experiencing is really masking the underlying meaning. He says that the dream that you're dreaming is called the manifest content. So what you see in your dream. I'm going to tell you about a dream a student told me. It was like the first quarter I was teaching college. And I, as a grad student, had taught Intro to Psych, and I had taught this chapter, and students wanted to tell me their dreams. And so I had learned from that to tell my students, I am not going to interpret your dreams. This is not my field at all. Don't tell me your dreams, because I don't like to hear other people's dreams in general, and I don't know how to interpret them correctly. So I had just gotten done saying that in my first real class after graduate school, and I had just gotten done saying, don't tell me your dreams. And a student raised his hand and he said, oh, but you got to hear mine. And I said, well, your funeral. Tell me your dream. So the dream he tells, this is the manifest content. So he's first outside of the plane, like he must have been floating in air because he could see the outside of the plane while it was flying, right? And he could see it from that perspective. And then suddenly he was inside the plane. And from the outside, he had recognized that it was a military, like C-130 type aircraft, and the props and everything. And then suddenly he's inside of it. And he sees everybody else is there, and they all have their parachutes on their back. And he's like, oh, right on. I'm an Army Ranger, and I'm going to parachute. This is awesome. So he's all excited because he's going to parachute, right? So he sees everybody else is adjusting their straps and getting ready. And so he starts adjusting his straps and getting all ready. And then he looks down and he goes, wait a second, I don't have a backpack on. Do I not get to jump? Or are you guys going to make me go without my parachute? What's happening? And so he said he looks up to figure out how come everybody else has a parachute and he doesn't have one. So he looks up and sees that, oh, wait a second, those are just backpacks they're wearing. Those aren't parachutes. They're all holding rulers in their hands. And they're all kind of looking at their rulers like they were checking their equipment. So he knew that those were somehow the parachutes, right? These rulers that they're all holding. So he looks down and, oh, what do you know? He has rulers in his hands too. So he's like, oh, okay, right on. I have my rulers. I just don't have a backpack. That's fine. So he's all ready. He's going to do his jump. And he can see, as it is the case in dreams, as a guy would jump out the door, he could then see them in midair, like guiding themselves down with these rulers, right? So he's all, interesting improvements in military equipment. So he knows how they work from watching everybody else. Then he looks down again and he realizes while everybody else is holding metal rulers, he's holding wooden rulers. Oh no, are my wooden rulers going to be strong enough to make it down to the ground and not break? And will they guide me? And oh no, I'm scared. And now it's his turn to jump. And he, of course, wakes up before he finds out whether his rulers were strong enough to make it to the ground. Okay, so he's like, there is no way that anybody could interpret anything out of that except for that was a nonsensical dream. I'm like, well, frankly, I'm kind of agreeing with you, but since you did what I told you not to do, I'm going to attempt a Freudian interpretation. I didn't tell him that I was doing it because he had offered a dream and I told him not to. But I just said, well, let's interpret it through Freudian theory. So I'm going to tell you guys a little secret that I didn't mention at the time in class. I only know 2 Freudian dream symbols. And one is for the penis. It's called a phallic symbol. And one is for the vagina. I don't know what its euphemism is called. I don't even know what it's called. The penis can be anything that's rigid, cylindrical, or alternatively, anything that's like snake-like, stuff like that. That would be your phallic symbols. The vagina is represented by anything that is like a hollow tube, anything with water rushing through it, anything with an open circle that things pass through. Those would all be interpreted as vagina symbols. So those are the only 2 I knew. I only know the name of one of them, so I clearly was not a dream interpretation specialist. Okay. So knowing that those are the only 2 symbols I know, this could only go one way, right? So I'm like, okay, so you start off, you're on the outside of the airplane, and what does an airplane look like from the outside but a cylinder? So it's a phallic symbol. Okay, then you find yourself inside the plane. Well, now you're inside of a tube, which is a vagina. Okay, so now you're inside of the vagina. Okay, and you're surrounded by a bunch of other men, which in Freudian dream interpretation, by the way, men are phallic symbols. So you're surrounded by a bunch of other phallic symbols. Okay, everybody else is holding metal rulers, so they are more rigid than your wooden rulers. So their phallic symbols are made of more rigid material than your phallic symbols. So clearly this is a whole inadequacy theme that you have generated here. You're worried that you don't measure up. That's why they're rulers, because you're worried that you don't measure up to the other men as you all jump through the vagina to do your parachute jump. Okay, so I'm just telling you guys, those are the only 2 symbols I know, so that's really the only way that you could actually even remotely interpret that. Maybe if I knew other symbols, there's another interpretation. Of course, he was embarrassed that he asked, and definitely nobody else offered a dream after that. I can tell you that, at least in that class. And then I tell this story as a cautionary tale. Don't tell me your dreams, because I really don't know how to interpret them through the Freudian theme. All I can tell you is that his dream, what he told me, was the manifest content. Like his storyline is the manifest content. I was attempting to interpret what the latent meaning of the dream was, right? So Freud introduced to us the idea that the dream might look like one thing and it really means something else. Truth be told, I'm an information processing person, and I always will fall back on the cognitive interpretation of things. This theory says that we sort out the day's events while we're dreaming. We use REM sleep as an opportunity to organize information in our cortex that we're trying to store permanently. Remember, I mentioned in a previous segment that long-term potentiation occurs during REM sleep. So when we're working on a synapse and trying to change the way that that synapse fires from now on, we are activating the neuron that we're working on. So we may cause an action potential to occur as we're trying to change the functioning of that synapse. Once the functioning has been changed, this neuron, this little connection, will only respond to information related to the memory that has now been stored in that synapse. But while I'm working on it, trying to change the functioning of that synapse while I'm experiencing REM sleep, an action potential may go down and communicate from this cell that I'm working on to its neighboring cell. And that's interpreted by our brain as actual information, because your brain doesn't know what triggered an above threshold response. It just knows that it had an above threshold response. So the action potential goes down, the neighboring cell receives the message and tries to figure out, why did you tell me that, right? So while we're busy organizing information and storing it into synapses, we oftentimes activate a neural network to start firing. So I've passed a message inadvertently by working on this synapse. It's caused an action potential to go down the cell's axon, and that communicates to the neighboring cell, who then passes it along. And so there starts to be activation. And your brain organizes all that stimulation that's going on and makes a story, makes up a tale to explain why you were having these thoughts out of nowhere. One thing that's really nice about this model is that anytime I'm storing a new memory related to something that I've stored before, I may reactivate that same neural net that I've activated in previous REM stages, and my brain will just say, oh, I've had this experience before, I'm going to retell the story. And so we get recurring dreams. You've probably all had dreams that are very similar to dreams that you had in the past. You're like, man, I have this strange recurring dream. When we have those recurring dreams, it might be because we're working in that same neural network, making a new connection. So our attempts to organize information may be actually causing, activation to occur that is kind of, not meaningful, but our brain makes up a story to account for why it's experiencing that stimulation. The key thing about this theory that you should take away is that dreams are representative of what you've been thinking about recently, what memories you're trying to form, things like that. So your dreams might be somewhat meaningful in as much as they reveal what you're worried about at the moment. So after, the guy's little blushing stopped because I made this crazy interpretation of his dream, I said, now I'm going to try and interpret it through the information processing theme. So I asked him, do you have any big changes coming up in your life that that are substantial, something that's really different from what's going to be happening today, let's say? He said, well, actually, this is my last quarter at this community college where I was teaching, and I'm getting ready to transfer over to the University of Washington. And I go, well, how do you feel about that? And he goes, well, I feel pretty good about it. I go, well, this dream would imply that you're worried that you don't measure up, right? That you literally are jumping into the unknown, and you're not sure that you've been well enough equipped to compete when you get there. So I reassured him that we prepare you really well at community colleges to be ready for, university level work. You're fine. You can do it. In fact, you're going to probably compete really well. We gave you metal rulers. We didn't give you wooden rulers. But the idea that, he might be jumping into the unknown and he doesn't feel equipped for it, that made a lot of sense to him. He's like, you know what? I'm trying not to worry about it. I'm trying to feel positive about it. But the truth is I am kind of worried about it. So as he's processing information, storing things in his neural networks in his brain, he is actually revealing what he's concerned about at the moment. So information processing thinks that there might be sort of masks to the dreams too. They don't talk about manifest versus latent content, but they do say that, it may not look exactly like what you're dreaming about. You might have to think about it for a second to see what that really means. So there's a little interpretation to be done in information processing also. Our last theory is called the activation synthesis theory. And in this theory, I got a picture that's showing stimulation coming up from the brainstem, because that's really key to what causes dreams, according to this model. So when you're in REM sleep, as we know, you're paralyzed. In addition to not being able to move, your sensory receptors aren't collecting information. You're not hearing what's going on around you. Obviously, your eyes are closed. You're not seeing anything. You're unaware of your environment while you're experiencing REM sleep. If your brain were to go 30 minutes without any inputs, it would start to think, hey, I don't need these neurons. It would start pruning. So you need some stimulation. So as you're laying there experiencing REM sleep, periodically these random bursts of activity come up from your brainstem through your limbic system and then land in the cortex. So we've got brainstem starts it. Limbic system can add in some emotional content. If that information passes through the amygdala, the right part of the amygdala, you could end up feeling fearful, or the right part, you could end up feeling angry, right? Or if it goes through the hypothalamus, you might feel sexually aroused, right? I mean, you might be experiencing pleasure, things like that. As it passes through the limbic system, it picks up these sort of emotional contents, and then it lands them in the cerebral cortex. And your cerebral cortex, like I said earlier, doesn't know where this stuff's coming from. Coming in through your sense organs or coming up as random stimulation from the brainstem, the cortex doesn't know the difference. So this information lands in the cortex. Very quickly, the cortex makes up a story to account for why it's feeling like it's feeling. Oh, I'm flying, or I'm mad at someone, I'm going to punch them, or other things, right? It just makes up a story on the fly. What's really nice about this theory is that it helps to account for those times when you've had those really bizarre changes of scene. Like, well, I was walking down the street and I was talking to my friend, and suddenly my friend became a dog. And well, that's a bizarre dream. Why would I have done that, right? Well, the activation synthesis hypothesis said a new burst of energy came through, and suddenly a burst of activity came through, and suddenly, new thought, not your friend, it's your dog, right? Suddenly it just changed. And so the activation synthesis hypothesis accounts for those really bizarre, inexplicable dreams that you sometimes have. It's actually just like sort of a sign of your creativity that you can make up a story so quickly to account for random changes. Now, in case you're thinking, well, don't you guys have some kind of evidence that one of these theories is better than the other at accounting for things? Yeah, we do. Actually, we have some pretty good data that supports two of the theories more than the other. Freud's theory is not well supported by data, which is my nice way of saying it's not supported by data. Information processing theory has been tested as far as is REM sleep really associated with the formation of memories, and do our dreams really represent what we're working on? So there was a really clever study where they had participants learn the rules to this really bizarre game that it kind of looks like you're doing math, but it's a game that has these rules about canceling out certain numbers and summing together other numbers and all sorts of crazy things, and it's really impossible to even explain. But the important thing is it was really complex. So they learn the rules to this game, and then they sleep in the lab. Some of them got to sleep uninterrupted, and some of them got woken up during REM. And then the next day, they all got tested on the rules to the game. The ones whose REM sleep got disrupted did much more poorly on the game the next day than the people who had gotten to sleep undisturbed. So it looks like we do use REM sleep to work out problems, stuff like that. They've also found that people have more REM movements, their eyes move more when they're going through periods of active learning. Like for you guys, during midterm week or times when you're writing papers or things like that, if we counted your random eye movements during those periods, you'd have a lot more eye movements than you would experience during times when you're having less cognitive activity going on. So again, there's evidence that REM is tied to learning and memory and information processing. Now, the idea that you make up dreams to account for what activity is going on, that's not as clearly explained through any of the data. That's like the explanation that the theorists have provided. Activation synthesis, on the other hand, has explained why you might make up stories and how you do it so fast. They wake people up while they're in the middle of REM sleep, and they ask them to do a word association task, where the person is supposed to recognize whether the two words that are presented are related to each other or not. And people who have been awakened from REM sleep are really quick at this task. They can see relationships between words much faster than people who are woken up from other stages of sleep, or even from people who are walking down the street fully alert right now. They're faster than anybody else when you're experiencing REM. So that's evidence that during REM sleep, you can take information and put it together really quickly, that your brain is like primed to be making associations while you're experiencing REM sleep. And so when you have certain kind of stimulation coming up, that would help to explain why you would so quickly associate that stimulation with some kind of story that you're making up. It's not precise because we can't see inside your head while you're dreaming. So we don't know exactly what's going on during dreams. But these two theories, I think one day are going to be brought together into one coherent theory that explains, maybe random stimulation comes up during those times when you're not as actively processing information, and information processing goes on during those times when you're really super busy, and that both maybe these two theories are really part of one bigger theory. I think that's what will ultimately happen, but so far it hasn't happened yet. So unsatisfyingly, I'll tell you, why do we dream? We're not really sure. Frankly, we're not even really sure you do dream. All we know is if we wake you up during REM sleep, you'll say you're dreaming. That's all we really know. All right, I'm going to stop here. We will shift gears. In our next segment, we'll talk about hypnosis.